On the night of her third wedding anniversary, Evelyn Hartwell stood alone in her multi-million-dollar mansion on Long Island, the wife of New York's most feared mafia boss. Outside, lavish parties, glittering crystal chandeliers, and hundreds of powerful guests filled the air. But inside, a decision had matured after 3 years of silence. She was pregnant, and she wouldn't let her child be born into a world of guns and blood. Tonight, Evelyn Hartwell disappeared. But no one escaped Roman DeLuca. No one. Please like and comment with the city you're viewing from to let me know how far this story has progressed. The cake was perfect. 3 tiers of ivory fondant, hand-piped with sugar roses that cost more than Evelyn's first car, arranged on a silver stand in the center of the grand ballroom, like some kind of trophy nobody was allowed to touch. She had watched the caterers set it up that afternoon with the same hollow feeling she got whenever she looked at anything inside this house. Beautiful, flawless, and completely disconnected from anything real. Evelyn stood at the edge of the second-floor balcony, one hand resting on the marble railing, the other pressed flat against the front of her evening gown. The fabric was midnight blue, cut to show a woman who had everything. Below her, 300 guests laughed and clinked champagne glasses and moved through the ballroom like they owned the world, which many of them did, in the particular way that men in their business own things, not through deeds or titles, through fear. She had counted the exits 4 times since noon. She had not told anyone about that. The catering staff had arrived at 2 in the afternoon, 14 of them. She had counted those too, noting which ones moved through the kitchen with the ease of people who had worked this estate before, and which ones kept their eyes down, careful, scanning doorways the way people scan doorways when they are not actually there to serve food. 2 of the new ones were Romans, security in aprons. She had recognized the posture, the way their shoulders never fully relaxed, the way they stood with their weight slightly forward even when they were just pouring water. Romans people were everywhere. They always were. She pressed her palm harder against her stomach. 3 weeks. She had known for 3 weeks, and she had said nothing, and every morning she woke up and lay beside her husband in the gray pre-dawn light and watched the ceiling and thought about what kind of world this child was going to be born into. Roman slept like a man with no conscience, which was not exactly true, but was close enough to the truth that it kept her awake. He slept deeply and completely, one arm sometimes crossing the distance between them and resting on her waist, and on those mornings she felt the most dangerous thing she had ever felt in 3 years of marriage. She felt like staying. She had driven herself to a clinic in Hoboken 3 weeks ago, paid cash, given a fake name that came to her without hesitation, Catherine Wells, and sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights until a nurse called the name that wasn't hers and handed her results that changed everything. She had driven home on autopilot. She had walked through the security checkpoint at the estate gate, nodded at the guards, climbed the stairs, stood in the bathroom with the door locked and the shower running so that no one would hear anything, and pressed both hands over her mouth. She had not cried. She had started planning. The note was in her clutch. She had rewritten it 11 times over 3 weeks, doing it in fragments, a sentence here, a revision there, always on paper she bought outside the estate, and always destroyed the drafts in a gas station trash can 2 towns over. The final version was 43 words. She had counted them. 43 words to end a marriage and walk out of a life that had been built like a fortress, specifically so that things like this could not happen. She had the car keys. A rental, not one of Roman's fleet, booked under Catherine Wells with a prepaid card she'd loaded at a pharmacy in 3 separate visits. She had the bag, small, already in the trunk of the rental which was parked in the overflow lot behind the caterer's van. She'd arranged that weeks ago, bribing one of the catering company's actual drivers to let her park there as a favor. A casual conversation that had cost her $500 and a story about surprising a friend. She had cash. $11,000 in small bills, built up over 8 months by pulling 200 or 300 at a time from ATMs in different neighborhoods during morning runs that she had made sure became routine enough that no one thought twice about them. She had thought of everything. She had not thought of how much it would hurt. Below, she saw Marco Falco, Roman's underboss, a man who had once kissed her hand at a dinner party with genuine warmth, and then, 40 minutes later, stepped outside to oversee something she had been told not to ask about. He was laughing now, arm around a man she didn't recognize, the laugh of someone who had never spent a moment genuinely afraid. Next to him stood Carmen Reyes, Roman's attorney, in a red dress that cost what Evelyn used to make in 2 months managing the bakery on Junction Boulevard, the one where she had hand-lettered the specials on a chalkboard every morning and known the names of regulars and thought that was enough, thought that was a life. Right up until Roman DeLuca walked through the door on a Tuesday in October 4 years ago and ordered a black coffee and looked at her like she was the only person in the room. She had been stupid to think that a man who looked at you like that didn't want to own you. That was not fair, and she knew it, and she thought it anyway. Mrs. DeLuca. She turned. One of the household staff, Elena, the one who had worked here for 11 years, who brought Evelyn chamomile tea without being asked, and who had the particular quality of knowing when not to speak, stood a respectful distance away, her expression the professional neutral of someone who had learned to keep their face very still. Your husband's been asking for you. The Marchetti family just arrived. The Marchettis. Of course. Roman had mentioned them 3 times in the past week, with a tone that meant the conversation was not actually about the Marchettis. It was about her presence, her performance, the version of Evelyn DeLuca who could move through a room full of people like these and smile and say the right things and make every man in the vicinity feel that Roman had chosen extraordinarily well. Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes, Evelyn said. Elena nodded and withdrew. Evelyn turned back to the railing. 5 minutes. She had not planned on 5 minutes. She had planned on waiting until 9:45, when Roman's attention would be consumed by the speech, the cutting of that perfect cake, the theater of public celebration. That was still 40 minutes away. She looked down at her clutch, felt the folded square of paper inside it. She did not go downstairs. Instead, she walked to the end of the balcony, through the connecting hallway, past the portrait of Roman's mother that hung between 2 sconces, past the door to the library that was always locked, and up the back stairs to the master suite on the 3rd floor. Her heels were quiet on the carpet. She could hear the party below like something from another dimension, the music, the murmur, the occasional burst of laughter. She changed her shoes in the bedroom. Flats, dark. From the nightstand drawer she took out the wedding rings, the engagement ring with its 3-carat emerald-cut diamond and the wedding band that Roman had placed on her finger with shaking hands, which had surprised her, that he had shaken. She held them for a moment. Then she set them on the nightstand beside his book. He was reading something about Roman history, the actual Romans, which she had once thought was a joke and had turned out not to be. She put the note next to the rings. She did not let herself stand there longer than 3 seconds. Down the back stairs, through the kitchen, 2 caterers who didn't look up, one of Roman's men who glanced at her, and she gave him the nod that meant she was stepping out for air, the nod she had practiced, the one that was casual and dismissive and gave him no reason to follow. Through the side door, across the stone path, through the garden gate that she had oiled herself last week, under the pretense of asking the groundskeeper to show her how the irrigation system worked. The night air hit her like cold water. She did not run. Running attracted attention. She walked at the pace of a woman who needed a moment alone, and the difference between that walk and running was everything, was the difference between escape and capture, and she focused on it with everything she had, the length of her stride, the angle of her shoulders, the way she held her arms. The catering van was still there. The rental was behind it, dark, anonymous. She unlocked it without the key fob, button press too visible at night, used the physical key instead, opened the door, got in, pulled it shut with just enough force, not too much. She sat for 4 seconds in the dark. Then she started the engine and drove. She did not turn the headlights on until she reached the end of the service road. The first 20 minutes were the worst. Every set of headlights in her rearview mirror made her hands tighten on the wheel. She took the route she had memorized, not the obvious one, not the fastest one, but the one that passed through 3 different townships and crossed the county line in a way that would complicate any immediate pursuit. The route she had driven twice in the past month to make sure she knew exactly where the intersections were without having to look at her phone. She did not use her phone. She had left it on the nightstand beside the rings. The disposable was in the bag in the back seat. She would use it to check into the motel. She would pay cash. She would not contact anyone. By the time she crossed into New Jersey, her hands had stopped shaking. By the time she saw the first signs for Pennsylvania, she allowed herself one long breath. She didn't cry until somewhere in the dark stretch of highway outside Allentown. And even then, it was brief, controlled, the kind of crying that didn't interfere with driving or visibility, the kind she had taught herself over 3 years of being married to a man whose world did not have room for weakness. She cried for the girl who had handed this man a coffee 4 years ago and thought she could handle whatever came with him. She cried for the thing growing inside her that was already a person, or would be, and who had not asked for any of this. She cried for the rings she had left on a nightstand in a house full of armed men. Then she stopped. She pulled into the parking lot of a motel outside Harrisburg at 11:42 p.m. 1 story, 12 units, a vacancy sign with the V burned out. Exactly the kind of place she had looked for. Cash-friendly, understaffed, the kind of establishment that did not ask questions because its clientele had historically preferred not to answer them. The man behind the desk was in his 60s, reading a paperback with the cover torn off, and he took her cash and her fake name without looking up more than once. Room 7, end of the row. She locked the deadbolt and the chain and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. Then she took the prepaid phone from the bag and turned it on for the first time. 2 minutes later, she turned it off again. Nothing to check, no one to call. She had made the list of what she would do in the morning. Drive south, find a larger city, build something new. Catherine Wells had a trajectory now, a future. The life she was constructing for her and this child was still just an idea, thin as paper, but it was hers. She stretched out on top of the comforter without undressing. She was asleep before she meant to be. In the ballroom of the Long Island estate, the cake was finally cut at 10:15. The photographer captured Roman DeLuca mid-laugh, champagne glass raised, surrounded by his people, and the image was beautiful in the way of all staged things. Roman accepted congratulations with the ease of a man completely at home inside his own power, and no one in the room could tell, looking at him in that moment, that he had been quietly checking his phone every 4 minutes since 9:45. At 10:58, he excused himself. He walked upstairs with the measured pace of a man who was not yet alarmed, though something in his chest had started pulling in a direction he did not want to follow. He had not seen Evelyn since 8:30. That was not like her. He had covered for her. She stepped out for a moment, you know how it is, twice already, and the covering had felt strange in his mouth. The bedroom door was open. He stood in the doorway for a moment before he entered. The room was still. The kind of still that came from an absence that had been deliberate. He saw the rings first. On the nightstand, side by side, the diamond catching the light from the hallway. Beside them, the note. He crossed the room in 4 steps and picked it up. He read it once. Then he read it again. His face did not change in the way that faces change when something breaks inside a person. It went still. Completely still. The way water goes still before something disturbs it from below. He set the note down. He walked to the bathroom. He did not know why. Some instinct, some pull toward evidence, toward understanding the shape of what had happened. He looked at the counter. Her perfume was gone, the specific bottle she kept there. The toothbrush. Gone. He opened the cabinet under the sink, and there, in the trash can, beneath a folded paper towel, was what she had meant to hide. He reached in and took it out. He stood in his own bathroom in his tuxedo on his 3rd wedding anniversary, holding a pregnancy test, and read the 2 lines with the particular stillness of a man whose entire understanding of a situation has just shifted on its axis. For a moment he did not breathe. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone and called the one person he called when the world required immediate action. Marco? His voice was level. That was the most frightening thing about it. Boss, the Marchettis are asking. Shut it down. Lock the guest list. Run the gate. Pull the security feeds from the past 4 hours. She's gone. A silence. Then, how long? At least 2 hours. Maybe 3. He looked at the pregnancy test in his hand. She's on foot, or she has a car we don't know about. Check the rental agencies in the county going back 60 days. Check them all. Roman, find her, Marco. He set the test on the counter with a gentleness that was somehow more unsettling than force. Find her tonight. He walked back into the bedroom and stood at the window, looking out at the manicured grounds and the lights of the tent and the movement of guests who were still celebrating something that had already ended. And he thought about a woman in a motel somewhere on the other side of a dark highway, alone, carrying a child she had not told him about. She had left him. She had left him carrying his child. The fear that moved through him in that moment was not the fear he was used to, not the cold, tactical fear of a man whose empire was under threat. This was something older and more fundamental. This was the fear of loss that had no remedy, the kind you could not fight your way out of, the kind that arrived in the night and would not be bargained with. His network was already moving before he reached the bottom of the stairs. 14 states. Every contact he had spent 20 years cultivating, every favor owed, every piece of leverage, every line of information, every eye and every city between here and the Pacific Ocean. He would find her. He always did. But what he would say when he did, that was the thing he stood at the bottom of his own staircase and could not answer, not even to himself, because the truth he had been keeping for 6 months now felt suddenly different in his chest, not like a secret, but like a debt that had come due in the worst possible way. He walked through the ballroom with his face composed and his eyes cold, and the guests who saw him stepped aside without knowing why, only knowing that something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, some fundamental pressure change that their bodies registered before their minds did. He walked out the front door. Behind him, the ivory cake sat untouched on its silver stand, 3 tiers of perfect fondant and sugar roses, a monument to a celebration that had turned to ash before anyone lit the candles. His phone buzzed. Marco. We've got a partial plate. Rental. Jersey City agency, 63 days ago. Roman closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Where? The partial plate was enough. It took Marco's people 40 minutes to narrow it down. 40 minutes of Roman sitting in the back of his armored Escalade in his own driveway, jacket off, tie loosened, phone in his hand, not looking at anything. The driver knew better than to speak. The 2 men in the front seat knew better than to breathe too loudly. Roman sat with his elbows on his knees and stared at the floor and thought about a pregnancy test in a trash can and 43 words on a piece of paper. He had read the note 6 times before he left the bedroom. He had memorized it on the 3rd reading and kept reading it anyway. I can't do this anymore. I can't be what this life needs me to be. I'm sorry. Please don't look for me. 23 words, not 43. He had counted wrong the first time, which was not something that happened to him. He counted wrong because his hands were not steady, and he was not going to think about that. His phone buzzed. Marco again. Catherine Wells, that's the name on the rental. Jersey City branch, 63 days ago, paid with a prepaid visa. The card was loaded at 3 different pharmacies over 2 weeks, Hoboken, Bayonne, Elizabeth. She was careful. Roman said nothing for a moment. She was planning this for 2 months. At least, he absorbed that. He had built an empire on reading people, on knowing when loyalty was real and when it was performance, on catching the microscopic tells that preceded betrayal. He had looked at his wife across dinner tables and in bed at 3 in the morning and in the passenger seat of his car on Sunday drives that she had started insisting on 8 months ago. I just need to get out of the house, Roman. Just drive. I don't care where. And he had not seen this. That was the part that cut deepest. Not that she left, that she had been leaving for months right in front of him, and he had been too convinced of his own ability to read the room to notice that the room had changed. Plate, he said. Marco read it out. Roman relayed it to the man in the passenger seat with a look, and the man was already on a separate phone before Marco finished the number. She paid cash at a gas station outside Allentown at 11:03, Marco continued. Single camera, partial face, but the build matches and the car matches. She's heading west or south. Could be Pittsburgh, could be further. She's not going to a city she knows, Roman said. She'd think that's the first place we'd look. Harrisburg, maybe. Or she keeps driving. She stops. She's been running on adrenaline for 3 hours and she's pregnant and she doesn't know yet that we're moving. She thinks she has until morning. She stops. Marco was quiet for a second. Harrisburg. Pull every motel and budget hotel within 5 miles of the highway exits. Cross-reference Catherine Wells. If she used a different name, look for cash payments after 10 p.m. Single female. No vehicle registered to the room. That's 30, 40 locations. Then you better start making calls. Roman paused. Marco. Yeah. Quietly. You understand what I mean by that. Another pause. Longer. I understand. Roman ended the call. He sat back against the leather seat and pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum, hard, like he was trying to push something back into place. The estate lights were still on. He could hear, distantly, the last of the guests being ushered out by his staff, the party continuing its mechanical conclusion without him, without her, without any of the meaning it was supposed to have. 3 years. He thought about the first time she had laughed at something he said, really laughed, not the polite laugh she'd given him that first Tuesday in the bakery, but the real one, unguarded, the one that made her press her hand over her mouth like she was embarrassed by how much she meant it. They'd been 4 months in, and he'd said something self-deprecating about his cooking, and she had laughed and then looked at him with an expression he still couldn't fully name, like she was revising something. He thought about the Sunday drives, 8 months of them. Every Sunday she asked, and he went because it was her asking, and now he understood that she had been driving the routes, memorizing the roads, using him as cover. He was going to be sick. He wasn't going to be sick. He pressed his hand harder against his chest and breathed through it and did not move his face. The driver said very carefully, "Where to, sir?" Roman looked up. "Nowhere yet. Wait." Evelyn woke at 4:17 a.m. from a dream she couldn't hold on to, just the sensation of it, something chasing her that had no shape, and lay in the dark motel room listening to the highway outside. A truck passed, then another, then silence, or the closest thing to silence a highway ever offered. She put her hand on her stomach. It didn't feel different yet, physically. She knew it wouldn't for a while, or wouldn't in any obvious way, but she pressed her palm flat and held it there like she was checking for something. "Okay," she said, to no one, to the dark, to the thing that was approximately the size of a raspberry and had already turned her entire life inside out. "Okay." She sat up. The room was what it was. Brown carpet, paisley comforter, a bathroom with a light that buzzed when you turned it on. The curtains were thick, and she had pulled them all the way across and checked the gaps twice before she let herself sleep. Old habit, or new habit. She wasn't sure when she had started doing that, checking the gaps, thinking about angles of approach and sightlines. She wasn't sure when she had started thinking that way at all, and that was its own kind of horror. How much of Roman's world had seeped into the way she moved through space without her noticing? She showered, cold water first, then warm, standing in the narrow stall and trying to organize her thoughts into something sequential. She would leave at 6, stay off the main highway, use county roads, head south toward Virginia. She had looked at a map weeks ago, had memorized the rough shape of the route without writing it down. She had a name she'd researched, a women's organization in Richmond that provided relocation assistance without government involvement, the kind of place that understood why some women couldn't leave a paper trail. She was drying her hair with a thin towel when the knock came. 3 knocks. Measured. Not the knock of someone who wasn't sure which room they wanted. She went completely still. 4:41 a.m. She moved to the window without turning any lights on, pressed herself to the wall beside the curtain and eased the fabric back a half-inch with 2 fingers. A man she didn't recognize, heavy-set, standing in front of her door with his hands at his sides. Casual posture, too casual, the kind of casual that was practiced. Her throat closed. She let the curtain fall and stood in the dark room with her pulse in her ears and thought with the fast, flat clarity of genuine fear. Back door. There was no back door. Single-story motel. Her window faced the parking lot. The parking lot was where he was. Bathroom window. Too small. Front door. He was in front of the front door. She picked up the prepaid phone and turned it on. Her hands were not shaking. She registered this with a distant, almost academic interest. She had expected them to shake, and they weren't. She dialed the front desk. "Room 7, she said when the night clerk picked up. "There's a man standing outside my door. I need you to call the police." A pause. A long one. "Ma'am, I'm sure it's—" "Call the police," she said. "Right now, while I'm on the phone with you." Another pause. Then, Yes, ma'am. Calling now. She stayed on the line. Through the curtain gap, she watched the man outside. He hadn't knocked again. He was just standing there, which was almost worse than if he'd tried the door. He had a phone to his ear now, reporting in. 30 seconds later, she heard a car in the parking lot. Then she heard the man outside her door say, "Police are coming." And then, unhurried, he walked away, into a dark sedan. The sedan left without its headlights on for the first 30 feet. She stood in the dark room for a long time after that. Then she grabbed her bag, still packed from the night before, and walked out the door into her rental car and got in and drove. And she did not stop at 6 like she'd planned. She left at 4:48 and took every back road she could find by instinct and the grainy offline map on the prepaid phone. They had found her in 6 hours. 6 hours. Etienne. Marco delivered the news to Roman in person, which was never a good sign. She ran, before our guy could make contact. They were in Roman's study now, dawn light coming gray through the windows, the party long cleared out, the estate quiet in the particular way it got when it was on lockdown. Coffee on the desk that Roman hadn't touched. "He was made," Roman said. She called the front desk and had them phone the cops. She was gone before he could do anything useful. Roman looked at him. I said quietly. Marco met his eyes. "He didn't do anything, Roman. He stood at the door. She just—" Marco stopped, started again. "She's sharp." She clocked him through the curtain. Roman turned to the window. The lawn was gray and wet with early dew. "Where did she go?" "We lost her. She took county roads, no cameras. She could have gone in any direction from Harrisburg. We're working on it, but how much does she have?" "Cash?" "We pulled the prepaid card activity going back 4 months. She loaded it 14 times, different amounts. Total comes to about 11,000. Roman nodded slowly. "That's enough to run for a while," Marco said carefully. "That's enough to run for longer than a while." Roman picked up the coffee, put it down again without drinking it. She's not panicking. She had roots. She had contingencies. She had cash distributed so it didn't spike on any single withdrawal. She thought about this the way I would have thought about this. He said it without inflection. Pure observation. Marco said nothing because there was nothing useful to say to that. "Who else knows she's gone?" Roman asked. "Core team only." I shut it down fast. The story for the guests is she got sick during the party, retired early. Nobody's going to ask questions. The Marchettis? Old Sal thinks she had a migraine. He sent flowers this morning. Roman almost laughed. The sound that came out was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. "Sal Marchetti sent my wife flowers." "Yeah. She's not here to receive them." "No." Roman was quiet for a long moment. Outside, one of the groundskeepers had appeared on the lawn, beginning the morning routine with the complete indifference of a man who knew that his job was the lawn and nothing else. Roman watched him rake a section of gravel path with methodical strokes and felt something move through him that he had no immediate name for. Envy wasn't the right word. It was adjacent to envy. The envy of a man who had spent 20 years building a structure so elaborate and so consuming that he had lost track of what it was supposed to protect. "I need to tell you something," Roman said. He did not turn from the window. Marco waited. "The Castor deal, the one you think is a weapons shipment consolidation." "The one I know is a weapons—" "It's not." Roman turned. "It's a sale, full transfer, every operation, every territory, every contract. To Castor's consortium. Clean hands on their end, they've been trying to go legitimate for 2 years. They have the infrastructure to absorb everything, and they have enough cover that the transition won't leave a gap anyone bleeds into." Marco stared at him. The silence in the room was the kind that had weight. "I've been negotiating it for 6 months, Roman continued. His voice was even. "The night of the party. That call I stepped out to take at 8 o'clock? That was the final term confirmation. We were 24 hours from a signing." Marco's jaw moved. Nothing came out. "I was going to tell Evelyn after the party," Roman said. "That was the plan. That was the whole point of the anniversary. Not the party. The party was for the people who needed to see normalcy. After the party, just her and me. I was going to tell her everything, and then we were going to decide together where we wanted to go." Roman. Marco's voice was low. Something in it Evelyn would not have recognized because Evelyn had never heard Marco sound uncertain before. How long have you been planning this? 2 years of wanting it, 6 months of actually building it. And you didn't tell me. I couldn't tell anyone, not even you. You know why. Marco knew why. If the wrong person caught wind that Roman DeLuca was looking to exit, every rival organization on the eastern seaboard would have read it as weakness and moved accordingly. The planning had to look like business as usual because anything else was an invitation to be buried. She left before you could tell her, Marco said. She left before I could tell her. Roman sat down in the chair behind his desk. For the first time since Marco had known him, 15 years, give or take, Roman DeLuca looked tired. Not physically tired. The other kind. She thinks I'm still in. She thinks she's running from exactly what she came to my house as. She doesn't know. No. Marco dragged a hand over his face. So when I find her, Roman looked up. Not we. I go alone. Roman, that is alone, Marco. She sees a team, she runs again. She sees me. He stopped. She sees me and I get one conversation. One. I need it to be just me. Marco looked at him for a long time. The loyalty between them was not a simple thing. It was not friendship exactly, and it was not purely professional. It was the loyalty of two men who had been in enough bad rooms together that they had stopped needing to explain themselves to each other on most things. This was not most things. If I send you alone and something happens, nothing's going to happen. You don't know that. You have enemies, Roman, real ones. And if word gets out that you're mobile and solo, nothing is going to happen, Roman said again, and the way he said it closed the subject. Marco left 20 minutes later. Roman sat alone in his study with the untouched coffee and the gray morning light and his phone and the note, which he had folded and put in his breast pocket and had no intention of taking out again. He opened his laptop, pulled up the tracking grid his people were running on the rental car. It was offline now. She had probably ditched it or found the tracker, which meant she was either smarter than the tracker placement or she'd been coached, and neither of those options was comforting. He stared at the blank grid and thought about a woman driving county roads in the early morning dark with $11,000 and a prepaid phone and a child neither of them had discussed. His child. He pressed his thumb hard against the corner of the desk until the edge bit into the skin. He had built all of this. Every connection, every dollar, every ounce of power. And none of it could do the one thing he actually needed it to do, which was let him sit across from his wife and say, I already chose you. I chose you 6 months ago. I was just finishing the paperwork. Duh. She found the tracker at a truck stop outside Frederick, Maryland. She hadn't been looking for it. She had pulled in to get gas and use the bathroom and eat something because the nausea had hit somewhere on Route 15, and she had learned in the past 3 weeks that the nausea got worse when she didn't eat, which was inconvenient and relentless, and she was already exhausted from fighting it. She was crouched behind the car checking the left rear tire. She'd felt a shimmy in the wheel, probably nothing, but she was not in a position to have a flat in the middle of nowhere. And she saw it. Small, magnetic, adhered to the interior of the wheel well where it wouldn't catch the eye unless you were down at that angle. She stayed crouched for a long moment, looking at it. Then she stood up and looked around the truck stop. Gas pumps, a diner with the lights on, a row of 18-wheelers idling on the far side of the lot. A refrigerated truck was pulling in from the highway. She walked to the refrigerated truck. The driver was climbing down from the cab, a large man in a canvas jacket, reaching behind his seat for a coffee thermos. Excuse me, Evelyn said. Where are you headed? He looked at her. Tennessee. Which route? I-81 to I-40. Why? She reached into her pocket and counted out $500. Held it out. I need you to not ask me any questions, she said, and I need you to let me put something in your wheel well before you leave. He looked at the money, looked at her, took the money. She transferred the tracker, watched the refrigerated truck pull back onto the highway heading southwest. Then she went back to her rental, drove it to the far end of the lot, and sat with the engine off for a long time, thinking about what came next. They had found her in 6 hours. They had put a tracker on a car she had rented under a fake name with a prepaid card, which meant they hadn't just traced the plate, they had traced the card, which meant they had worked backward from the pharmacies, which meant they had surveillance footage or informant contacts or both, which meant the infrastructure she was running from was significantly larger and faster than she had let herself fully believe. She had always known, intellectually, what Roman was, what he ran. She had lived in the house, seen the men, absorbed through 3 years of proximity the scale of it. But knowing a thing and having it chase you down a county road at 4:48 in the morning were two different categories of understanding. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. The nausea was back. She breathed through it. She needed another car. She needed to get off any road that connected to her last known position. She needed to think 3 steps ahead instead of 1, the way he would think, the way she had watched him think at dinner tables when someone brought him a problem. That stillness, that lateral movement through the angles of a situation. She needed to stop running like someone who was scared and start running like someone who was going to win. She sat up, looked at the diner. There was a corkboard visible through the window, the kind of corkboard that had index cards pinned to it. Cars for sale, rooms for rent, the informal economy of people who needed things done without paperwork. She picked up her bag and walked into the diner. She had $11,000 and a fake name and a child she had already decided to protect at any cost. And somewhere behind her, on a road she didn't know, Roman DeLuca was already moving. She could feel it, the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm arrives. That specific weight in the air that meant something was coming, and there was no longer any question of whether. Only the corkboard had 7 index cards on it. Evelyn stood in front of it with a cup of coffee she wasn't going to drink, reading each card with the methodical attention of someone who had stopped having the luxury of being casual about anything. 2 rooms for rent, 1 handyman service, 1 card advertising piano lessons for children that had been there long enough that the edges had gone yellow. 1 car, a 2009 Ford Escape, blue, 140,000 miles, asking $1,800, call Darnell. She called Darnell at 5:22 in the morning. He answered on the second ring, which meant either he was already awake or he slept with his phone. And she didn't care which because he answered, and when she told him she wanted to see the car today, this morning, early, he said he could be at the truck stop in 40 minutes. She ordered eggs she didn't want and ate them standing at the counter because the nausea was particular about sitting down, apparently, and she watched the parking lot through the diner window and drank water and thought. The tracker was heading to Tennessee on a refrigerated truck. That bought her time, but not as much as she would have liked because whoever was running the grid on Roman's end would eventually notice the signal moving at highway speed toward the wrong state and understand what had happened. She estimated 4 hours before they recalibrated. Maybe 6 if she was lucky, but she was done counting on luck. She needed to move. And she needed to move clean. Darnell arrived in 38 minutes, which she liked. A man who said 40 and showed up at 38 was a man you could work with. He was in his late 50s, canvas jacket, the kind of face that had been weathered into something permanent and reliable. The Escape was exactly what it was supposed to be. Old, unspectacular, the kind of vehicle that could sit on any street in any mid-sized American city and attract no attention whatsoever. She paid him in cash. $1,600. She talked him down $200, not because she needed the $200, but because someone who didn't negotiate would stand out in his memory as strange, and she needed to be forgettable. She signed the title transfer as Catherine Wells. He didn't ask for ID, and she didn't offer any. They shook hands in the truck stop parking lot at 6:04 a.m., and he drove away in her rental, and she stood beside her new old car and put both hands flat on the roof for a moment, just for a second, feeling the cold metal under her palms. Okay, she thought. Okay. She drove south. By 7:30, she was on Route 340, moving through the valley between 2 long ridges of mountain, the kind of landscape that felt like the country exhaling. She had the window cracked despite the cold because the air helped with the nausea. The radio picked up a country station, and she left it on not because she liked country music, but because the voices were company, and she needed the specific comfort of other human voices that were not asking her anything. She was thinking about Richmond, the organization she'd researched, the one with no government ties. Their intake protocol required a phone call first. She had the number memorized. She had planned to call from Harrisburg before the man outside her door rearranged the timeline. She reached for the prepaid phone, then stopped. The prepaid card had been traced, which meant the phone number she had used the prepaid card to add minutes to was potentially compromised. Not certainly. It depended on how deep Roman's people had gone into the carrier records. But potentially. Using this phone to call a number connected to her exit plan was a risk she hadn't planned for. She needed a new phone. She needed to think harder about what else was compromised. She made a list in her head. The rental was gone. The tracker was gone. The prepaid card was burned. The prepaid phone was questionable. The name Catherine Wells was burned at the motel level and probably flagged in whatever network Roman's people were running. She needed a new name. She had thought about this, had a second name prepared, Margaret Cole, but Margaret Cole had no documents, no history, and moving forward on nothing but a name was a different kind of risk. She pressed her thumb against the steering wheel and breathed. One thing at a time. New phone first. Cash purchase, gas station or drugstore. Then call Richmond from the new phone. Then assess. She stopped at a Walgreens outside Martinsburg at 7:58 and bought a prepaid phone with cash, paid for it with a 20 and coins so the transaction was below the threshold that triggered anything, walked back to the Escape and sat in the parking lot and set up the new phone with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. She dialed the Richmond number from memory. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice, professional but warm, the particular warmth of someone who had answered this call many times before. "Good morning, you've reached—" "I need intake," Evelyn said. "I was told to call this number. I'm in transit. I need to know if you still have capacity." A brief pause, the sound of a chair shifting. "Can I get a first name?" "Margaret." "Margaret. Okay. Where are you calling from?" "West Virginia. I'm moving south." "Driving?" "Yes." "When do you think you'll reach us?" Evelyn calculated. 4 hours? Maybe 5? "Okay. I want you to call us again when you're 30 minutes out. Don't stop here without calling first. That's protocol. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Are you safe right now?" The question landed differently than she expected. She sat with it for a second in the Walgreens parking lot in the early morning with a cup of coffee cold in the cup holder. "For now," she said. "Okay, Margaret. We'll be here. Call when you're 30 minutes out." She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her lap and thought that was the first human exchange she'd had in 14 hours that wasn't transactional and that the woman's voice had carried something she hadn't known she needed to hear until she heard it. She pulled back onto the road. She did not make it to Richmond. She was on I-81 south of Strasburg, the valley widening on both sides, when the Ford Escape's check engine light came on. She registered it, filed it under manageable, kept driving. Then the car began to lose power on an uphill grade, the engine sound changing pitch in a way that made her stomach drop. She managed to get it to the shoulder before it stopped entirely. She sat in a car that was no longer moving, on a highway in the Shenandoah Valley, and felt the specific quality of silence that follows a system failure. She did not scream. She pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed for 10 seconds, and then got out of the car. The shoulder was narrow. Trucks blew past at 70, and the wake of them hit her like a physical thing each time. She stood at the rear of the Escape and looked at nothing in particular, and thought about the fact that she was standing on the side of a major highway with a dead car, a new prepaid phone, 83 miles from where she needed to be, and the clock in her head that tracked Roman's progress was still running. She called a tow service, paid cash when they arrived, 20 minutes later. A kid in his 20s who hooked up the Escape without commentary and drove her to a garage in a small town called Woodstock, which struck her as the kind of name that belonged to a different kind of story than the one she was in. The mechanic at the garage looked at the Escape for 8 minutes and told her the timing chain was gone. Repair would take 2 days minimum. She said she understood, paid the tow fee, took her bag, and walked out. She stood on the main street of Woodstock, Virginia at 9:41 in the morning. The town had a post office, a hardware store, a diner, a small motel. Population probably under 5,000. Not a place you passed through when you were trying to disappear into a city. Not a place with many outbound options. She walked to the diner. She was on her second cup of coffee. The nausea had settled into something she could manage if she kept eating small things, so she had ordered toast. When the door opened and a woman walked in, Evelyn looked up because the movement registered. Her eyes had been doing that since midnight, clocking every door, every entry, tracking the shape of people as they arrived. She had stopped being aware of doing it because it had become continuous. The woman was in her mid-40s, tall, wearing a coat that was too light for the morning. She sat 2 stools down at the counter, ordered coffee, and when it arrived, she wrapped both hands around the mug and looked straight forward. She had the posture of someone who was not here accidentally. Evelyn set down her coffee cup. The woman spoke without turning. "He's not trying to hurt you." Very still. The whole room didn't change, but Evelyn's portion of it crystallized into something sharp and airless. "I don't know who you're talking about," Evelyn said. "Yes, you do." The woman turned now. Her face was unremarkable in the way of faces that have been practiced into unremarkability. Her eyes were direct without being aggressive. "I'm not from his organization. I'm independent. He hired me 8 weeks ago." Evelyn looked at the door. "There's no one outside," the woman said. "I came alone. That was the arrangement. I find you, I talk to you, I don't bring anyone. He wanted it that way. He hired you to find me. He hired me to find you if you ever ran. That was the brief 8 weeks ago." A pause. "He knew you were planning it. He didn't know when." The toast in Evelyn's stomach turned to concrete. "He knew," she said. "Not the details. But people who are planning exits move differently than people who aren't. He noticed. He didn't stop you." Evelyn looked at her. "He didn't stop me." "No." "Why?" The woman wrapped her hands tighter around her mug. "Because he said, if you wanted to leave badly enough to plan it that carefully, stopping you wasn't the right answer. Finding you and talking to you was." Evelyn sat with that. The diner sounds continued around them. The clatter of a plate, someone's conversation from a booth, the cook calling something to the waitress. Completely ordinary sounds from a world that had nothing to do with any of this. "What's your name?" Evelyn said. "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." A slight pause. "Nora." "Nora." Evelyn folded her hands on the counter. They were not shaking. "What were your instructions if I wouldn't talk to you?" "Report your location, that's all. No extraction, no retrieval." He was explicit. "And you're reporting my location right now?" "I already did, 20 minutes ago, when I confirmed you were in this town." Evelyn closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "How long?" she said. "He was already moving before I called. He's been moving since 4 this morning, when the tracker signal went wrong and he understood what you'd done." Nora looked at her coffee. "He's good at this. You know that." "I know that." "He'll be here in somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 hours, depending on traffic south of Front Royal." Evelyn opened her eyes. She looked at the door. She looked at the window. She looked at the length of the counter and the booths beyond it and the ordinary Saturday morning shapes of people eating breakfast in a small Virginia town. 90 minutes. "Why are you telling me the timeline?" Evelyn said. "Because he told me to." "Why would he tell you to give me a head start?" Nora was quiet for a moment. She turned her coffee mug a quarter turn. Then she said, "Because he's not trying to trap you. He said if you know he's coming and you still run, he'll understand that. But he wants you to know he's coming. He doesn't want to surprise you." Evelyn looked at her. "That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works." "I know. Men like him don't give you a heads up. They don't send someone to have a polite conversation at a diner counter. They send 3 men in an SUV and you don't have a choice." "I know," Nora said again. "So what is this actually?" Nora met her eyes. "I think it's a man trying to do something he doesn't know how to do, which is ask instead of take." She said it plainly, without sentiment. "I don't know what he wants to say to you. That's not my part of this. But whatever it is, he wanted you to be standing still long enough to hear it." Evelyn stared at the window. Outside, the main street of Woodstock was doing its morning. A couple walking a dog, a pickup pulling into the hardware store lot, a kid on a bicycle taking the corner too fast. All of it relentlessly, indifferently normal. She had 90 minutes, maybe less. She picked up her coffee cup and set it down without drinking. The nausea had come back with a particular sharpness that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. It was the nausea of the specific moment when a plan you have spent months building reveals the dimension you didn't account for. She had planned for pursuit. She had planned for trackers and informants and the full weight of his network. She had planned for roadblocks and rental traces and cash operations and exit routes. She had not planned for him to already know. She had not planned for him to have known for 8 weeks and done nothing. "He let me run," she said, mostly to herself. Nora said nothing. "He had someone watching and he let me run." Evelyn pressed her thumbnail hard into the edge of the counter. "Why would he do that? Why would he set up a net that wide and not close it?" "I told you what he told me." "Tell me again." Nora looked at her steadily. "He said, if she runs, let her run. Find her, talk to her, tell her I'm coming, and tell her she has a choice. That's all." Evelyn pushed back from the counter and stood up. She put money on the counter, too much, she didn't count it, and picked up her bag. "If you're reporting to him," she said, "then you can tell him I heard you." She walked out. Outside, the morning air was cold and clean, and she stood on the sidewalk with her bag over one shoulder and thought about directions. She could go north, back up I-81. She could try to get a ride south toward a larger town, somewhere with a bus depot or a rental agency. She could go into the hardware store and ask if anyone was driving anywhere. She could sit on this sidewalk and wait. She stood on the sidewalk for 30 seconds, and in those 30 seconds, something happened inside her that was not a decision exactly, but was the moment before a decision, the moment when you feel yourself moving toward something, not because you've chosen it, but because the other directions have closed. Not because someone closed them, but because something in you is done pretending they were ever real options. He had known. He had known, and he had built a net, and then he had deliberately left it open. She didn't understand that yet. She needed to understand that before she did anything else. Because a man who left the net open was either the man he had always shown her, the one who controlled everything including the exits, or he was something she didn't have a name for yet, something that her 3 years of bracing against him had made it impossible to see clearly. She walked back into the diner. Nora was still there. She looked up without surprise. Evelyn sat back down. "Tell me about the Castor deal," she said. Something shifted in Nora's face. Almost nothing. A fraction of something. "I don't know what that is," Nora said. "You work for him. You've been working for him for 8 weeks. The Castor deal is the biggest thing in his world right now, and you're telling me you don't know what it is." Nora was quiet. "You do know," Evelyn said. "And whatever it is, it's why he's coming himself instead of sending Marco." Nora set down her coffee mug. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Evelyn with the expression of someone who has reached the boundary of their instructions and is making a call about what comes next. "I know pieces," Nora said carefully. "I know it's a transfer, large scale. I know it's been in negotiation for months, and I know it was supposed to close this week." "A transfer of what?" Nora said nothing. "Nora?" "Everything," Nora said, very quietly. "From what I understand, everything." The word sat on the counter between them like something physical. Evelyn looked at her. "Define everything," Evelyn said, and her voice came out flat and precise, the voice of a woman who was done being managed, who needed actual information and was not going to stop until she had it, who had crossed too many state lines and ditched too many cars and been too thoroughly afraid to accept anything vague right now. And Nora, who had been doing this kind of work for 11 years and had learned to read people the way some people read weather, looked at Evelyn DeLuca sitting in a diner in Woodstock, Virginia, with dark circles under her eyes and a bag packed for a life she was trying to build from scratch, and told her. Nora told her everything she knew in 11 minutes. Evelyn sat and listened without interrupting, which was harder than it sounded because every sentence landed like something hitting glass. Not breaking it, but finding the frequency that made it vibrate. The Castor Group. A legitimate holding consortium out of Toronto with clean hands and a board that had spent 3 years building the kind of regulatory goodwill that made acquisitions frictionless. Roman had made contact 18 months ago through a third party, an attorney who specialized in the particular kind of legal architecture required when the thing being transferred was not supposed to exist on paper in its current form. 6 months of actual negotiation. Every territory, every contract, every debt owed and favor banked, every piece of infrastructure that Roman DeLuca had spent 20 years assembling, transferred, dissolved, or legitimized through a process so carefully constructed that the people inside the organization wouldn't know it was happening until it was done. The signing was supposed to happen Thursday, 2 days from now. Nora folded her hands around her coffee mug. I don't know why he was doing it. He didn't tell me that. People in my line of work don't usually get the why. Evelyn looked at the window. I think you know the why, Nora said. Don't, Evelyn said. Nora stopped. Outside, a truck passed on the main street, heavy, the sound of it filling the diner for a moment and then fading. The cook in the back said something to the waitress, and the waitress laughed, a real laugh, short and unself-conscious. Evelyn thought about the Sunday drives. 8 months of them. Roman behind the wheel, one hand loose on the wheel, the way he drove when he wasn't thinking about driving, the radio low. Both of them mostly quiet because they had the kind of marriage that could hold silence without it meaning something bad. Or she had thought that, she had believed that, she had constructed an entire interpretation of their silences as evidence of something good and solid between them. And now she was sitting in a diner in Virginia, understanding that the silences had been full of things neither of them was saying. He had been planning his exit. She had been planning hers. They had been sitting in the same car on the same roads, in parallel silences, dismantling their lives in the same direction, and they had not told each other. She pressed both palms flat on the counter. How far out is he? She said. Nora checked her phone. I haven't gotten an update since I called, but if he left when I think he left, she calculated. 60 minutes, maybe less. Evelyn nodded. She sat with 60 minutes. Then she picked up her bag and stood up and said, I'm going to be outside. Okay, Nora said. If he asks, tell him I'm not running. Nora looked up at her. Tell him I'm waiting, Evelyn said. She walked out. The morning had warmed slightly, or she had stopped noticing the cold, which was not the same thing but felt similar. She walked to the end of the block and back. Then she sat on a bench outside the post office and put her bag between her feet and looked at the street. She thought about the note she had left. 43 words. No, 23. She still couldn't count straight. She'd been off by 20 words and had not caught it in 11 rewrites, which told her something about the state she had been in when she wrote it. 23 words to summarize 3 years. She had worked on it for 2 months, and it still came out to 23 words because there was no version of it that was longer and also true. Every additional word she had tried to add had been either an explanation or an apology, and she had not wanted to explain and she had not wanted to apologize. She still didn't. But she was sitting on a bench in Woodstock, Virginia, and she was not running, and she was trying to be honest with herself about why. It was not because of what Nora had told her. That was part of it, but not all of it. She could have absorbed that information and still run. Still gotten on a bus and gotten to Richmond and built the Catherine Wells life, or the Margaret Cole life, or whatever life came next. The information didn't obligate her. What had stopped her was something smaller and less articulable. It was the fact that he had known for 8 weeks and left the net open. The fact that he had sent one woman with instructions to talk, not to take. The fact that in 20 years of building a world on the principle that everything had to be controlled, or it became a threat, he had looked at her leaving and decided not to control it. She didn't know what to do with that yet. She was going to have to figure it out in the next 60 minutes. She heard the car before she saw it. Not because it was loud. It wasn't. It was a dark blue sedan, unremarkable. The kind of vehicle that Roman would use precisely because it was unremarkable, but because her body had apparently developed a specific frequency for his approach that operated below the level of conscious thought. Her shoulders changed. Her breathing changed. She recognized both changes and sat very still and watched the sedan come down the main street of Woodstock at a measured pace and pull to the curb 20 feet from her bench. He got out alone. She had half expected it and half not. He was in dark trousers and a gray shirt, no jacket despite the cold, like he had left somewhere in a hurry or had stopped caring about things like jackets. He looked exactly like himself and also not like himself at all. She had seen Roman DeLuca in every configuration that 3 years of marriage produced. Angry, calm, tender, in the specific guarded way he was tender, dangerous in the way she had learned to read and never entirely gotten used to. She had not seen this before. He looked tired. Not physically. The other kind. The kind she had felt in her own chest for months without naming it. He stopped when he saw her, maybe 10 feet away. He did not close the distance, and she did not close it, and they looked at each other across the sidewalk in the flat morning light of a small town that had no idea what it was hosting. "You're not running," he said. "No." He nodded slowly, like he was processing it. "Nora talked to you." "Yes." "How much did she tell you?" "Enough." Evelyn looked at him. Castor. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Yeah." "You were going to tell me Thursday." "After the signing, yes." "Why after?" He was quiet for a moment. A pickup drove past on the street between them, and they both waited without meaning to. The noise of it, a temporary interruption, they both let pass. "Because I needed it to be done," he said. "Not, I'm trying to get out. Done. I didn't want to hand you a plan. I wanted to hand you a fact." Evelyn looked at him. "You thought I wouldn't believe the plan." He held her gaze. "I thought you deserved better than a promise from a man in my position. I thought you deserved the thing itself." She stood up from the bench. Her legs were stiff from sitting in cars and diners, and she registered this distantly, the physical reality of the past 18 hours asserting itself. She picked up her bag. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "I'm pregnant." He said nothing. His face did the thing she had watched it do with the note. Went completely still, not empty but dense, too much happening inside it for anything to show on the surface. "I know," he said quietly. "You—" She stopped. "The test. I found it. In the bathroom trash." She breathed. "When?" "Same night, after the note." He looked at her and something in his face opened slightly, a crack in the stillness. "Evelyn, don't. I need to say. I know you need to say it." Her voice came out harder than she intended, cracked slightly at the edges. "I know, but I need you to hear me first. I left because I thought I was protecting this child from your world. That was the only thing. 3 years, and I was never going to leave for myself. I kept thinking I could manage it, handle it. But the pregnancy," she pressed her hand against her stomach without meaning to, the same gesture she'd made 100 times in the past 3 weeks. "I couldn't put a child in that house, Roman. I couldn't do it." "I know. That's all I knew. That's all I had. I didn't know about Castor. I didn't know you were—" She stopped, looked at the sidewalk. "I spent 2 months planning, and I didn't know the most important thing." "That's on me," he said. "That's entirely on me." They stood there. The post office door opened behind her, and an elderly man came out with a package under his arm, nodded at them both with the placid courtesy of someone who saw nothing unusual about two people standing on a sidewalk, having a conversation that was visibly the most important conversation of their lives, and walked to his car. "I need to know something," Evelyn said. "Ask. The signing. Thursday. Is it still happening?" "That depends on yes or no." He looked at her. "Yes. If I make 2 calls in the next 4 hours, yes." "Make the calls," she said. Something moved through his face. "Evelyn, I'm not forgiving anything," she said quickly, because she needed that to be clear. "I'm not saying I understand what 3 years of this has been, or what it costs to undo, or whether we—" She stopped. "I'm saying make the calls, close it, and then we figure out the rest." He was looking at her in a way she didn't have a name for. "I left my rings," she said, "on the nightstand." "I know. I meant it. When I left them, I meant it." "I know that too." She held his gaze. "I don't know what I mean right now. I'm telling you that honestly. I'm standing on a sidewalk in Virginia, and I've been awake for most of the past 20 hours, and I've been afraid the entire time, and I'm—" She stopped, breathed. "I'm not afraid right now, and I don't know what to do with that either. He took one step toward her, just one, and stopped. Can I? He said it and then didn't finish it, which was the most unexpected thing she had ever heard from this man. A man who finished everything, who always had the next word, who had built an empire on never leaving a sentence incomplete. She looked at him. Yeah, she said. He crossed the distance and put his arms around her, and she stood in it for a moment, with her arms at her sides and her bag still on her shoulder, and every complicated, unresolved, genuinely unanswered thing still sitting exactly where it had been sitting. And then she put one hand against his back, not holding on, not surrendering, just present, just there. They stood on the sidewalk in Woodstock for about 30 seconds. Then his phone buzzed. He pulled back slightly, looked at the screen. His face changed. She recognized that change. What? She said. Vitelli, he said. The name landed in her chest like something cold. Even she knew that name. 3 years in that world and you couldn't not know that name. The Vitelli faction, the one rival organization that Roman had never fully neutralized, the one that had existed in a state of cold, managed hostility for years, the détente maintained through a balance of threat and mutual economic interest. I thought they were contained, she said. They were. He was already looking down the street, reading the landscape differently than he had been 30 seconds ago, the exhaustion leaving his face and something else taking its place, the version of him she had been running from. Marco says they've had eyes on me since I left the estate. They know I'm mobile. He looked at her. They know I'm alone. What does that mean? It means someone told them I was trying to exit. His jaw was tight. Someone in my own organization passed information to Vitelli's people. Evelyn stared at him. Who? I don't know yet. He put his hand on her arm. I need you to go back inside, the diner. Nora's... I'm not going back inside. Evelyn, I am not going back inside and waiting for you to handle something, Roman. That's the whole marriage. That's 3 years of going back inside. She held his gaze. Tell me what's happening, right now, all of it. He looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then he told her. Vitelli's faction had been watching the Castor negotiation. Not the specifics had been airtight, but the shape of it, the pattern of meetings and attorney contacts and the particular kind of careful nothing that surrounds a very large something. They had drawn the right conclusion. And a man like Vitelli understood exactly what Roman exiting the structure meant. Not just the loss of a rival, but the loss of the equilibrium that rival maintained. New players would move into the vacuum. Wars would happen, the kind that were bad for everyone. Vitelli's solution was simple. You don't let the man exit. You make an example of the exit. He's going to make a move, Roman said, today, while I'm exposed. How many men does he have? The question surprised him. She could see it. Why, he said, because I'm standing on this sidewalk with you and I want to know what we're dealing with. His phone buzzed again. He looked at it. The blood left his face in a way she had never seen before. Not in 3 years, not once. What? She said. He showed her the screen. A photo, taken from a distance, telephoto lens, sometime in the last 10 minutes. The main street of Woodstock, the bench outside the post office. 2 figures, her and Roman, unmistakable, the conversation captured in grainy, long-range detail. Below the photo, a message. Tell your wife we said hello. She felt the cold move through her before she understood why, and then she understood why. They hadn't sent the message to Roman's phone to threaten him. They had sent it to show him they already had the angle. They were already here. Roman's hand closed around her arm, not harsh, not the controlling grip she had braced against for years, but the grip of a man whose body had made a decision before his mind completed the sentence. Move, he said. She moved. They were 3 steps from the diner entrance when the black SUV came around the corner at the far end of the block, doing 50 in a 25 zone and not slowing down, not at all. Accelerating, actually. And Roman said something she didn't hear because the sound of it was swallowed by the noise of the engine and her own heartbeat, and the particular compressed silence that arrives in the half-second before the SUV jumped the curb. It came up onto the sidewalk 20 feet ahead of them, and Roman had her by the arm, and they were already moving sideways, diving left behind a parked pickup truck, the mass of the truck between them and the SUV, which had stopped. Doors already opening, Two men coming out of the back with a speed and purpose that had only one meaning. Roman put her behind him. She hit the side of the pickup with her shoulder and felt it, a bright spike of pain, and registered it and set it aside. "Stay behind me," he said. "Roman, stay behind me." The two men from the SUV were on the sidewalk. One of them she half recognized from somewhere, from the circulating faces of functions she had attended, the peripheral figures of that world she had spent 3 years learning to read. They were not carrying anything visible, and that was almost worse. "DeLuca," one of them said. He was not loud. He said it the way you say a name when you already have the room. "Vitelli sends his regards." Roman had his phone in his left hand, and she couldn't see what he was doing with it, couldn't see his right hand at all. "How many?" Roman said. "Just us." Wrong answer. The second man moved. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds, and Evelyn's brain recorded it the way her brain had been recording everything for the past 18 hours. With the flat, detail-saturated clarity of extreme adrenaline, every frame distinct and too bright. Roman moved toward the second man instead of back from him, which was the wrong instinct for a civilian and the right instinct for what he was, closing the distance before the man could use it. There was a sound she didn't have a word for. The first man started toward her, and she did the only thing available to her, which was get inside the pickup truck. The door wasn't locked, some miracle of a small town where people didn't lock their trucks. And slam it and hit the lock and press herself across the bench seat away from the window. Through the windshield, she saw Roman and the second man and the kind of violence that had no choreography, nothing clean about it, just two people trying to physically reduce each other's capacity for harm, and Roman was bleeding from somewhere on his left side and still moving, which was the thing she held on to. The first man slammed both hands on the driver's side window. She looked at him through the glass. He looked back at her. Then his eyes went to somewhere past her, behind her, through the passenger window, and his expression changed. She turned. Nora was standing on the passenger side of the truck with her phone in one hand and something else in the other that she held with the specific ease of someone who had trained with it, and she was looking at the man on the driver's side with an expression that required no translation. Sirens. Distant, then less distant, then distinctly approaching. Someone in the diner had called, or the post office man with his package, or the ordinary machinery of a small town that had heard a vehicle jump a curb. The first man looked at Nora, looked at the truck, looked at the approaching sound. He ran. Evelyn pushed open the passenger door and got out and looked at Roman. He was standing. That was the first thing. He was upright, which required active effort she could see in his posture, one hand pressed against his left side. The second man somewhere behind him that she didn't look at. She crossed to him in 5 steps. "How bad?" she said. "I'm standing." "That's not what I asked." He moved his hand from his side and they both looked. His shirt was dark with blood at the left flank, not soaked through but enough, the deep red of it vivid against the gray fabric. "I need to sit down," he said, which was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. She put her arm around him. His weight shifted against her, partial, controlled. He was not letting himself go completely, some part of him still monitoring the street, the sirens, the angles. But he let her take some of it. He leaned into her and she felt the whole mass of him, the physical reality of him, and her arm tightened around his back. "The calls," she said. "Castor, you said 4 hours." "Yeah. How much of that have we used?" He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Too much." The sirens were close now. A cruiser appeared at the end of the block. Nora materialized beside them, phone already to her ear, speaking quietly and quickly to someone about a location and a situation and medical requirements. "There's a hospital in Winchester," Nora said to Evelyn. 20 minutes. Evelyn looked at Roman. He was pale under the tan and his breathing was deliberate, the controlled breathing of a man managing pain through sheer discipline. "Can you walk to the car?" she said. "Yes." "Then walk." He walked. She kept her arm around him and he walked and she matched her pace to his and they moved toward the dark blue sedan at the curb, past the SUV still half up on the sidewalk, past the spilled coffee from the bench she had been sitting on, past all of it. She got him into the passenger seat. She took the keys from his jacket pocket. She went around to the driver's side and got in and adjusted the seat. He was 8 inches taller than her and the seat was all the way back, and started the engine. Winchester, she said to herself. Roman had his head back against the headrest. His eyes were open, watching her with an expression she recognized from the very early days of their marriage, before she had learned to read him, before she knew all his configurations. She had not seen it in a long time. "You can drive," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." "This car is— I know what kind of car this is." She checked the mirrors. The cruiser had stopped at the SUV. No one was paying attention to a blue sedan pulling away from the curb at a normal speed. She pulled out. He was quiet for a moment, then, "Evelyn, don't talk. You need to apply pressure to that and not talk." She looked at him sideways. "I know what you want to say. You don't. Try me." He turned his head, looked at her. Outside the window, Woodstock's main street ended and became a county road heading north, the mountains on both sides, the pale winter sky above. "I would have followed you," he said, "even if you'd made it. Even if you'd gotten to Richmond and rebuilt everything and made a life I couldn't touch. I would have followed you." He paused, breathed. "Not to bring you back, just to make sure you were okay, that you both were." His hand moved involuntarily toward her direction, not reaching, just moving. "I would have been a ghost in the background of your life for the rest of mine." She looked at the road. Her hands were tight on the wheel. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I know." She drove. The mountains rose on both sides and the road straightened out ahead of them, and Roman DeLuca sat in the passenger seat of his own car, bleeding from a bullet wound he had taken while standing between her and the thing that was trying to reach her. And Evelyn kept her eyes on the road and her foot steady on the accelerator and did not let herself think about anything past the next 20 minutes. Because 20 minutes was Winchester, and Winchester was a hospital, and the hospital was Part 5. The emergency room at Winchester Medical Center had the particular quality of all emergency rooms at all hours, fluorescent and relentless, time moving differently inside it than outside, the smell of antiseptic and something underneath the antiseptic that no amount of cleaning ever fully reached. Evelyn sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area with her bag between her feet and both hands wrapped around a cup of vending machine coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She had not moved from the chair in 45 minutes. She had not moved because moving felt like it would require a decision about direction, and she did not have the capacity for that right now. She had driven Roman here. She had pulled up to the emergency entrance. She had helped him out of the car with her shoulder under his arm and his weight against her side. And she had stood at the intake desk and answered the nurse's questions with a clarity that surprised her. His name, his age, the nature of the wound, approximately how long ago. Yes, she was his wife. No, she didn't know his blood type, which was a thing she was going to have to sit with later. And then they had taken him through a set of double doors and left her in a plastic chair with a cup of bad coffee and 45 minutes of her own thoughts. She had called Nora from the car. Nora had said she would handle the police situation in Woodstock, which Evelyn had not asked her to elaborate on, because she understood that there were categories of handling that she was better off not having detailed knowledge of. Nora had also said one other thing at the end of the call, before she hung up. "He's been trying to get out for 2 years. I've done a lot of work for a lot of people. I've never seen anyone try this hard to undo something." Evelyn had said nothing to that, and Nora had not seemed to expect her to. The double doors opened and a doctor came through, mid-50s, tired in the permanent way of ER physicians, the kind of tired that had become structural. "Mrs. DeLuca?" She stood. "Yes." "Your husband is stable. The wound was a through and through to the left flank. The bullet passed cleanly, no organ involvement. We've cleaned and closed it. He lost meaningful blood, but his vitals are stable and we have him on IV fluids." He looked at her with the professional assessment of someone who had delivered a lot of news to a lot of people in this room. "He's going to need rest and antibiotics, and he's going to be in significant pain for several days, but he's not in danger." She nodded. "Can I see him?" "In about 10 minutes. We're getting him settled." The doctor paused. "Are you all right?" She looked at him. "You should sit down again," he said, not unkindly. And eat something if you can. You look like you've been running for a while." She almost said something and then didn't. She sat back down. She stared at the cold coffee. She thought about the man in the room beyond those doors who had stepped in front of her on a sidewalk in Virginia without hesitating, without calculating, without doing the thing he always did, which was assess the angles and act from the assessment. He had just moved, body before mind. The instinct of it was the thing she kept returning to, kept pressing on the way you press on a bruise to understand its dimensions. She had spent 3 years trying to understand what was real in Roman DeLuca and what was performance, what was the man and what was the role. It was not a simple question because the role was so total, so embedded, that she had genuinely not known where one ended and the other began, had not known if there was a line at all, or if the man and the role had fused into something that couldn't be separated without destroying both. She thought she might have her answer now. It was just not the kind of answer you could do anything clean with. Yeah. The room they had put him in was small and pale green and had a window that looked at a parking structure. Roman was in the bed with his left side bandaged and an IV line in his right arm, and the particular deflation of a very physical person who has been temporarily reduced to horizontal. He looked up when she came in. She pulled the chair close to the bed and sat. They looked at each other. "How bad does it feel?" she said. "Like someone put a hole in me." Accurate. He almost smiled. Didn't quite get there. She put the cold coffee on the windowsill and folded her hands in her lap and looked at the bandaging visible above the edge of the hospital gown. The doctor had said through and through, no organs, which she understood rationally and which her body had not yet accepted rationally because her body was still running on the adrenaline memory of seeing the dark spread of blood on his gray shirt. "The calls," she said. "Marco made them." He shifted slightly, stopped. "While you were parking the car, I had him reach the Castor attorneys. The signing is moved to Friday, 1 day delay." "Will they still do it?" "Yes. Marco handled it." A pause. "Marco's good. I know Marco is good. He's been with me 15 years. He deserves—" Roman stopped, looked at the ceiling. "He deserves a real life, too. I'm going to make sure he has one." She said nothing. "The informant," Roman said, "the one who passed information to Vitelli." "Do you know who?" "Yes." His jaw tightened. "I know who." She waited. "Danny Reese. He runs my logistics operations in Brooklyn. Has for 8 years. Roman's voice was flat, not angry. Beyond angry, into something that had no temperature. He knew about Castor. Not everything, but enough. He has people inside Vitelli's organization, and he was using them for his own side arrangements. He thought if Vitelli took me out, he could position himself in the transition. "What happens to him?" Roman looked at her. "I'm asking," she said. I'm asking because I want to know what kind of answer you give me, right now, today." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Marco will handle it through the Castor transition. Danny's operations get folded into the transfer. His personal exposure gets documented and passed to the appropriate federal contacts through the attorneys." He paused. "He goes to prison. Eventually. Through channels that don't involve me directly." "Federal contacts," she said. "Part of the exit architecture. The Castor deal involves cooperation with a federal task force that has been building a case against 3 organizations for 6 years. My cooperation is part of what makes the deal clean. I provide information, testimony if required, in exchange for immunity from prosecution for myself and—" He stopped. "For my family." She absorbed this. "You've been cooperating," she said, "for 4 months, quietly, through the attorneys." "Roman, I know. You've been cooperating with a federal investigation while running an active criminal empire and negotiating its sale to a legitimate consortium." "Yes." "And you were going to tell me this on Thursday." "Yes." She stood up. Not in anger. Her legs just needed to move. She went to the window and looked at the parking structure and the slice of gray sky above it and breathed for a moment. This was the thing about Roman DeLuca. You thought you had reached the full dimension of him, and then there was another room. There was always another room, She had spent 3 years walking through rooms, and she was beginning to understand that the architecture was not deception exactly, but was the result of a man who had built walls so long ago and so automatically that he no longer knew all of them were there. "Was I in the immunity agreement?" she said. "By name." "Yes." She turned. "Since when?" "Since the beginning. The first conversation with the federal contact. First thing I said was that my wife was not part of any operations, had no knowledge, had no culpability. I made them put it in writing." She looked at him in the pale green hospital room with the parking structure outside the window and the IV line in his arm and 3 years of marriage and 23 words and $11,000 and a child the size of something very small between them. "You protected me before you protected yourself," she said. "Yes." "In a deal that was supposed to protect you." "Yes." She sat back down. The chair was uncomfortable. She adjusted her position and looked at her hands and thought about the bakery on Junction Boulevard, the chalkboard specials, the smell of it in the morning before she opened, the specific satisfaction of a thing that was entirely hers and entirely uncomplicated. And she thought about the fact that she could not go back to that, not because of Roman, but because she was not that person anymore. 3 years had made her into someone she was still in the process of identifying, someone who could drive a shot man to a hospital at speed on unfamiliar roads and answer intake questions without her voice breaking. She was not sure yet whether that was a loss or not. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay." "If none of this had happened, if I hadn't gotten pregnant, if I hadn't left, would you have told me? About Castor, about the federal deal, about all of it?" He was quiet. "Thursday," he said. "I had it planned down to, I had a place. Restaurant in the city, just us. I was going to tell you in the right order, give you the full picture, and then I was going to ask you something." She waited. "I was going to ask if you wanted to stay," he said. "After everything, after I told you all of it, I was going to ask if you still wanted to be in this, with me, on the other side of it." He looked at her. "I wasn't going to assume the answer." She looked back at him. "That would have been the first time," she said, "in 3 years, that you asked instead of decided." "I know." "Why Thursday? Why not a year ago? Why not when you started planning it?" "Because a year ago I didn't know if I could make it real, because I didn't want to ask you to hope for something that might not happen." He shifted against the pillow, the movement costing him something he didn't show. "Because I was afraid." She held very still. "You were afraid," she said. "Yes." "Of what?" He looked at the window, at the nothing view of concrete and gray sky. "That you'd say no. That you'd look at what I was trying to become and decide it was too late. That the version of me you might have loved was already gone from too long in the version of me I'd been." He paused. "That I'd get out and it still wouldn't be enough." The room was quiet. Outside in the corridor, a cart moved past, wheels squeaking, someone talking into a radio. The ordinary sounds of a place that processed emergencies all day and absorbed them. She reached out and put her hand over his. The one without the IV line. She put her hand over his and felt the specific temperature of it, the familiar geography of his knuckles, and she did not say anything for a moment. "I don't know what we are," she said finally. "I need you to understand that. I'm not sitting here telling you it's fixed. It's not fixed. There are things I need that you've never given me, and there are ways I've been in that house that I can't go back to, and I have a child coming into the world in about 7 months who is going to need a father who is actually present and not running an empire, and I need time. I need time to figure out what I actually want on the other side of all of this." "Okay," he said. "That's it? Okay? What do you want me to say?" She looked at him. "I want you to tell me what you want." He turned his hand under hers, turned it so his palm was up and his fingers closed loosely around hers, not gripping, not holding, just there. "I want to close the deal on Friday," he said. "I want to get out of this hospital. I want to go somewhere that is not New York and not a house full of armed men, and I want to sit across a table from you for as long as it takes and have every conversation we should have had over the past 3 years. And I want our child to be born somewhere that doesn't require an armed escort to get to the maternity ward. He paused. That's what I want. All of it, or none of it, only if you want it too. She looked at their hands. I left my rings on your nightstand, she said. I have them. She looked up. You brought them. He reached with his free hand to the folded clothes on the bedside table. The gray shirt, dark and ruined, set aside by the nursing staff, and reached into the breast pocket, brought out the 2 rings, set them on the blanket between them. She looked at them. The emerald-cut diamond, the wedding band. She did not pick them up. Not yet, she said. Okay. I'm not saying no, I'm saying not yet. I understand the difference, he said. She believed him. Marco arrived at the hospital at 2 in the afternoon. He came alone, which meant Roman had told him to come alone. And he walked into the room with the particular posture of a man who had been holding a great deal together under significant pressure and was allowing himself exactly 1 moment of visible relief before reassembling. He looked at Roman, then at Evelyn, then at Roman again. You look terrible, Sal, he said to Roman. Thank you, Marco. The Woodstock situation is contained. Nora's people are thorough. He pulled a chair to the other side of the bed and sat. The 2 from the SUV, one is in custody, local police, which is going to become a federal matter within 24 hours through the task force pipeline. The other, he glanced at Evelyn. She knows, Roman said. Marco looked at her, and something in his face shifted. An adjustment. She had known Marco for 3 years as the underboss, as the man who managed everything Roman needed managed, as a presence in the house that was loyal and careful and occasionally kind to her in small ways that she had always filed under uncertain category. She had not known him as a man who was also, apparently, going to be free. The other is not a problem, Marco finished. And Danny, Roman said. Marco's jaw tightened. Handled. The documentation is with the federal attorneys. He doesn't know yet. A pause. When he finds out, he'll know where it came from. That's fine. It's going to be ugly for a while. Most things are. Roman looked at the ceiling. What about Vitelli himself? Vitelli is going to sit very still for the next 6 months. He made a move on you in broad daylight in a civilian location, and it failed. And now there is federal involvement, and his 2 men are either arrested or gone. He's going to sit still and wait to see what the Castor transition produces, and he's going to decide it's safer to accept the new landscape than fight it. Marco said it with the flat certainty of someone who had been doing threat assessment for 15 years. He's not a stupid man. Stupid men don't last as long as he has. Make sure he understands what cooperation looks like, Roman said, through the appropriate channels. Already in motion, Roman nodded. The 3 of them sat in the pale green room for a moment. Outside, the light had shifted. It was afternoon now, the gray sky warming almost imperceptibly, the parking structure casting a different shadow. Marco looked at Evelyn. How are you? It was such a direct question, asked so simply that she almost didn't know how to receive it. I'm all right, she said. The baby, Marco said. He said it quietly, without drama. Roman told me, when he called from the road. He held her gaze with a steadiness she hadn't expected. Congratulations. For what it's worth from where I sit. She looked at him. It's worth something, she said. Roman was discharged on Saturday morning with a prescription, wound care instructions, and a level of pain medication he immediately decided he wasn't going to take as directed because he needed to think clearly, and the medication prevented thinking clearly, which Evelyn told him was the most predictably him thing he had ever said, and he did not argue the point. They drove north from Winchester in the blue sedan, not back to Long Island, not yet. She drove. He sat in the passenger seat with the seat pushed back for his legs and his left arm positioned carefully against the door and his eyes tracking the landscape with the expression of a man who was deliberately not being somewhere else. Where are we going? She said. I know a place. Outside Front Royal. He stopped. It's not operational. It's not connected to anything. It's a house I bought 6 years ago for reasons I told myself were about investment and were actually about something I didn't want to name. She glanced at him. An exit, she said. An exit, he agreed. The house was at the end of a long gravel road in the foothills of the Blue Ridge. A farmhouse that had been renovated carefully and was furnished sparsely, and had a porch that faced west and a wood stove in the main room that took her 3 attempts to light while Roman sat at the kitchen table and watched her do it without offering advice, which was the correct choice. When it caught, she sat back on her heels and looked at it. "I can do a lot of things now," she said. It was not directed at him exactly. "That I didn't know how to do when I moved into your house." "I know," he said. "That's not an accident. I learned things by necessity, and some of them I learned from watching your world, and I'm not sure how to feel about that." "Complicated," he said. She looked at him over her shoulder. "Yes." She stood up. She went to the kitchen and found that someone, Marco's people, or a standing arrangement, had stocked the basics. She made coffee. She made eggs, because the nausea had developed an opinion about eggs, and the opinion was in favor, which was an improvement over last week. She made 2 plates and brought them to the table and sat across from him, and they ate. It was the most ordinary thing she had done in 4 days, and she felt it in her whole body. The specific relief of a plate of eggs across a table from another person with no one else in the house and no function to perform. "The signing is Friday," he said. "I know. I need to be in the city for it. One day. Marco will have security in place that—" "I'll come with you," she said. He looked at her. "I want to see it," she said. "I want to be there when it happens." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to." She met his eyes. "I want to." He nodded. Once, slowly, they ate in silence for a moment. "The federal testimony," she said. "How long will that process take?" "The attorneys say 18 months to 2 years. Depositions, documentation review. I'm not the only piece of it. There are other cooperating witnesses, other angles. My part is significant, but not endless. And after that," he looked at his plate. "After that, we're clear, legally clean. The immunity agreement is comprehensive." He paused. "Wherever we are after that is just wherever we are." She thought about Tuscany. The word had surfaced in her mind 3 days ago, or maybe longer. Some buried preference she had never examined because it had always felt like the kind of thing you only wanted if you were the kind of person who got to want things like that. Vineyards. Light that came in at a different angle than American light, something she had read about and never seen. A child in a garden somewhere that was not a house with guards at the gate. She did not say any of this yet. "I need to call my sister," she said. "She doesn't know where I am. She's going to be—" She stopped. "I disappeared off the face of the earth for 4 days." "I know, I'm sorry." She looked at him. "Her number was on my old phone." "I know her number," he said. She almost laughed. "Of course you do." "It's not—" "I know," she said. "I know what it is and isn't." She pushed her empty plate aside. "Give me the number." He gave her the number. She used the new prepaid to call, and her sister answered on the first ring with a voice that was several different kinds of terrified condensed into a single syllable of her name. And Evelyn said, "I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm going to tell you everything, but I'm okay," and spent 20 minutes on the porch in the cold talking to the one person in her life who had known her before any of this. Before Junction Boulevard even, who had known her when she was just a girl from Queens with flour on her apron and ordinary ambitions. When she came back inside, Roman was asleep at the kitchen table. Not dramatically. He had simply run out of whatever was keeping him upright. The pain medication he wasn't taking correctly, and the blood loss and the 2 days of driving and the weight of everything, and his head had gone down onto his folded arms, and his breathing had deepened, and he was asleep in a kitchen chair with his coffee half finished. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at him for a long time. Then she got a blanket from the hall closet and draped it over his shoulders, and sat back down across from him with her coffee and the quiet and the sound of the wood stove working through its first fire, and thought about everything that was still unresolved between them, which was most of it, which was the honest truth, and thought that most of it was the kind of thing that could only be resolved through time and the accumulation of days that looked nothing like the past 4, and that this kitchen, this quiet, this man asleep across from her, was the first thing in a very long time that felt like it might become that kind of time. She was not ready to call it forgiveness. She was not ready to call it trust, but she was sitting here. She had stopped running. She had put her hand over his in a hospital room and meant it, and whatever that meant about who she was and what she wanted, it was true. And she had spent enough time in the past 4 days stripping everything down to what was true to know that she wasn't going to argue with it. The baby moved. It was the first time. She was early enough that she hadn't expected it, hadn't known to expect it, and the sensation was so foreign and so specific and so unmistakably what it was that she went completely still with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. She set the cup down. She put both hands flat on her stomach. Outside, the Blue Ridge Hills held the afternoon light in the long way of mountain country, the kind of light that made distances look manageable, made the far thing look like something you could actually reach. The wood stove ticked. Roman breathed across the table from her, slow and even and alive. She sat with her hands on her stomach and let the moment be what it was. Not a resolution, not an ending in the clean sense, more like the first quiet after a storm that has taken the roof off and left you standing in the open air looking at the sky, injured and not yet rebuilt, but breathing, but upright, but here. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the window and the light and the hills beyond. She stayed. 6 months later, in a house outside Montalcino in the Tuscan hills, the light came through the kitchen window at 7 in the morning the way she had always imagined it would, oblique and golden, the kind of light that moved slowly, that didn't rush anything. She stood at the kitchen counter making bread, not from a recipe anymore, not after the 3rd month of making it 3 times a week, just from the accumulated knowledge in her hands, the feel of the dough, the way it told you what it needed. There was flour on her forearms, and the kitchen smelled the way kitchens were supposed to smell, and outside the window the vineyard rows ran straight down the hillside toward the valley. She heard him on the porch before she saw him. She had learned the sound of him here, in this house, in these 6 months. The sound of him when he was not being anyone in particular, just himself in the morning with coffee, walking the perimeter of the vineyard the way he had once walked the perimeter of everything he controlled. Except now the perimeter was grapes, and the control was entirely relinquished. And he was, she had slowly understood, genuinely at a loss about who he was without the empire, genuinely having to find out from nothing. And the finding out was not graceful or finished, but it was real. She heard him stop at the porch railing, the sound of him putting his coffee cup down, the particular quality of his stillness that she could now read at a distance. She left the bread and went to the door. He was standing at the railing looking at the valley below, one hand on the railing, coffee on the rail beside him. He was in work clothes. He had started going out with the vineyard manager in the mornings, learning the actual physical work of it, coming back with dirt on his hands and a look on his face she had never seen in New York, something she had to keep looking at to understand. And his shoulders were carrying nothing in particular for once. He heard her and turned. "Bread," she said. "I can smell it." "It needs another 40 minutes. He nodded. He turned back to the valley. She came to stand beside him at the railing. Below them, the rows of vines ran orderly and quiet in the morning light, the leaves just beginning their first heavy summer growth. A hawk was doing something lazy and deliberate in the updraft above the far hill. She was 8 months in now. The pregnancy had progressed without complication, which the doctor in Florence said was remarkable given the circumstances of the first trimester, and which Evelyn privately attributed to sheer determination and a dietary relationship with eggs that had only recently resolved itself. She was large and uncomfortable, and had stopped sleeping well 2 weeks ago, and her back ached, and she would not have changed a single thing. Roman put his arm around her carefully, as he always was now. Not timid, just careful. The specific care of a man who had relearned how to touch someone, had gone back to something more fundamental than the confident ownership of the man he'd been, and found something more honest on the other side of it. She leaned into him slightly. "She moved again last night," Evelyn said. "I heard you get up. She has opinions about 3 a.m. "She's mine then," he said. There was something in his voice when he said it that she still hadn't gotten used to, a quality of naked feeling that he no longer tried to cover. "The federal attorneys called yesterday," she said. "I know. I talked to them this morning." "And?" "The deposition schedule is moving up. They want me in Rome in 3 weeks. He paused. 4 days? Maybe 5. She nodded. "I don't have to." "You have to," she said. "We both know you have to." "I can have someone." Roman. She tilted her head up to look at him. I'm 8 months pregnant, and I live in a Tuscan farmhouse with a vineyard manager named Giuseppe, who brings us olive oil from his cousin's grove and a doctor 30 minutes away. I will be fine for 5 days. He looked at her. The morning light was in his face, and he looked nothing like the man in the portrait in the Long Island hallway, and everything like someone she was still in the process of knowing. I know you'll be fine, he said. Then what? He stopped, let out a breath. I don't want to miss anything. She looked at him for a moment, then she took his hand off the railing and placed it on her stomach, on the place where the baby was currently doing something assertive and unmistakable, and watched his face when he felt it. She's not going anywhere, Evelyn said. We have time. He kept his hand there. His jaw moved slightly. He looked at his hand on her stomach and then at the valley, and the hawk still riding the updraft, and the rows of vines going straight down the hill in the morning light. Yeah, he said, quietly. We do. She stayed beside him. The bread needed another 40 minutes. The vineyard needed nothing from them this morning. The valley below was doing what valleys did, holding the light, being itself, asking nothing. They stood at the railing of a house that was entirely theirs, in a country that had never known their names until 6 months ago, and the woman who had once been a bakery manager from Queens and the man who had once been the most feared name in New York stood together in the ordinary morning and let the ordinary morning be enough. It was.